Tangled from the spider web here. Well, it is a pleasure and a privilege to get to open up the Word together with you again. Last month when I was preaching, we had just started a study in the Gospel of John, and we will be going there again this morning. Thank you for those of you who are here in person, and for those of you who are also on Facebook. We're glad that you can join us and get to open up the Word together, and we'd love to have you here. If you are here local, our main worship service is 11 o'clock. Always get these times mixed up. 11 o'clock, and then preceded by Bible hour at 10 o'clock, and a Wednesday Bible study at 6:30. So you are welcome to join us here as well. Well, I'd like to start this morning by talking about getting old. And some are like, "Oh, come on," and others are like, "Yeah, you really are." Simeon and Jenna Ray were just married. And talk about something that makes you feel your age.
I would say Simeon and Jenna Ray.
See? Age. What an example. Simeon and Rachel. Simeon and Rachel. Oh, she's downstairs, isn't she? Okay, all right, well. Oh, thanks. I appreciate that you all are reliable to do that for me. Faithful. So Jenna Ray's marriage was a long time ago. So Rachel and Simeon, and I remember whenever I pulled away with Jenna Ray from my mom and dad's house to go on our honeymoon, and I saw my dad just sort of standing there alone, and his eyes just sort of had this deep look in them. I was like, oh, and I sort of get that now. It makes you think of what is beyond, and it's easy for us to get caught up in our everyday life, the next thing that's on the list. And especially if you're the kind of people, all of us are pretty much all of us are involved in some way with social media and the news cycle and all of these things. Not only are we facing what mankind has always faced, which is the local news and things that are going on, but we have a better access to what is day by day going on with the world, and our minds can be absolutely crowded with the cares of the world. Genuine things to be, there are genuine problems and genuine people involved in these issues, but it's almost like we feel like as soon as we hear about an item, we need to, not only one, we need to know about it, two, we need to have an opinion on it, and three, we need to defend it publicly, and on a million issues. And it can just be overwhelming. And so for a busy mind, or at least mine, feels busy, it can get clouded and hard to even see the way forward, and it's easy to lose track of where we're meant to be in life. And so this is coming together and opening the Word is just one way that God has loved us in reminding us of the need to be recalibrated, to be understanding what's really going on. So part of that aging process for me has been my hearing is just going away, and obviously I can still hear enough to sing and this sort of thing, but one thing I've noticed going away is when I'm in a crowd, if you've ever tried to have a personal conversation with me in a crowd, you may have noticed that I do this quite a bit. And it's because when I'm in a crowd, I just can't differentiate the sound. The words, I'll be seeing your mouth moving, and I just can't quite get it. And I'll sometimes lean in and I'll close my eyes just so I can focus on what I'm really trying to hear. I noticed that my wife, being a shorter person, is like, sometimes some short people find it annoying when tall people bend over them when they're talking. It's like, it's not that, I just really can't hear. But I focus in because it matters, and I have to get beyond this cloud of wah going on all around me and focus in on what's happening here. Well, this morning we're going to deal with two people who are having crises in their life, and Jesus has interactions with them. One's having an acute crisis, and another is having a chronic one, suspected his whole life. We want to see how Jesus steps in, and if they are going to hear him correctly and understand their interaction with him, they're going to have to look beyond their present circumstances. Jesus is directing their attention further beyond. And so the title for today is Further, Seeing Beyond with the Eyes of Faith. And I could give this another subtitle if I wanted to. It's 2 healings, 2 rebukes, and 2 responses. So we're going to watch and see both how Jesus interacts with these people in their time of need, but also then what is expected of them. If they're going to hear Jesus and interpret him aright, what needs to be going on in their hearts? So I hope we can find encouragement from the various characters in this account, including the crowd of the Jews. But last time when we were together in the Gospel of John, we were dealing with the Samaritan woman, and we saw Jesus break down barriers by speaking to this woman, and not just speaking to a woman, but to a Samaritan, and not just a Samaritan woman, but a woman who would be considered of ill repute. And he met that balance of speaking with her, of giving her the truth, but he also didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't tell her things that weren't true. He didn't bend his message to make her happy. He told her hard truths about herself, but he also did so in such a way that was showing love and acceptance to her, but also giving her the truth that she so desperately needed to hear. And so we saw then, if we're going to be in John chapter 4, I'm going to go back and read the end of this account. Verse 39 says, "Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, 'It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves. And we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world.' And so this town, full of cultists, full of people that were not following God aright, have now, because of Jesus' interaction with them and giving them the truth, are now believing. This town has many Samaritan believers in it now through his testimony, through his unexpected testimony to this woman. She has had her life confronted with truth, and she has had it reoriented, refocused. She's able to see what God has for her to see. In verse 43, it says, "After the 2 days, he departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown." Now this is interesting here, because he says, after the 2 days, he departed for Galilee. So going out of Samaria into Galilee. Then it says, for Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. The word that is translated for here usually is giving us a reason, as the ESV tends to make it. Other translations will make this just a parenthetical comment, now Jesus himself had testified. So whether it's meant specifically as Jesus is going specifically to Galilee because he had no honor, it could be that he's purposely entering this situation for the purpose of correcting this or of being a testimony against this issue of a prophet having no honor in his hometown. Or it could just be John giving us a parenthetical note, hey, note this. So as we're going into this region and this next story, we need to have it on our minds that Jesus had said a prophet has no honor in his hometown. The next verse says, "So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast." So they have seen all that he has done, and they are welcoming him. They are excited. One could almost say they're honoring him. So what's up with this? Why is John saying, hey, Jesus said prophet doesn't have honor in his own hometown, but yet when he comes to Galilee, the Galileans who had seen his miracles are welcoming him? I want to go back to chapter 2 briefly. Verse 23 says, Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. So going back to chapter 4, I think what we're dealing with here is an instance of there is external praise for what Jesus is doing. He's doing amazing things, and obviously people are noticing. And hey, everybody likes a good show. Everybody likes to see healing. Everybody likes to see miracles. I would love to see a genuine miracle right in front of my eyes today. I would welcome it. I would be happy for it. But we know that there's a difference between, and the scriptures bear this out, and John is doing this in this text this morning, there's a difference between someone who sees the miracle and sees it as the sign it is from God and takes it to heart, has that context of belief, or that their heart responds for the first time in genuine belief. There's a difference between that and someone who just really wants to see cool stuff, really wants to see their own worldview crystallize through what they're seeing. Yeah, see, we're on the right side. See, God's working through him. You can totally be against what Jesus is teaching, but really you'd be amazed by his miracles. Totally understand where he's coming from and the point that he's making, but still be like, wow, yeah, we're the Jews. And Jesus has been confronting this sort of response with the people, both those who are accepting it for the wrong reason or for those who are completely rejecting him for bad reasons as well. So he is coming into his hometown, and there is this outward welcome, but Jesus himself knows that there's no honor for him here in his hometown. So first main point this morning, for seeking to see beyond, to see things how they really are and orient our lives by that. Number one, approval of the masses does not equal understanding. Our mission must be grounded more deeply in the very heart of God. Again, approval of the masses does not equal understanding. Our mission must be grounded more deeply in the very heart of God. Jesus isn't putting his thumb up in the wind and seeing which way it's blowing. He's not looking at the people and saying, what are they going to respond to? He has a mission from the Lord. He is moved by the Spirit of God, and he is following that leading and doing what the Lord has called him to do, regardless of whether the crowds are screaming an acclamation for him, or, as they will do later, scream and yell for his death, for his crucifixion. Jesus is here to do the mission no matter what the response is. And we as a church, and I mean that is beyond just our local body, we have to get rid of this obsession that out there has to be like we want it to be. That we've got to, if we're doing things right, that people are going to be flocking to us. If we're doing things right, people are going to approve of us. We can sometimes get ourselves so identified with various, with our region, with our politics, with you give the topic. These things can start to take over our hearts rather than understanding that we are part of a separate kingdom, that we are serving a king whose kingdom is not of this world. And we are seeking to live that kingdom life in the midst of a wicked and crooked generation. So when we are going out into the world, we are seeking then the heart of God. What we are seeking to do is to be calibrated so that that our desires, our joys, are in line with who God himself is. We read the scriptures not just so we get a lot of content, but so that we understand the Spirit of God speaking through them into our own hearts. We are seeking a genuine further growth through the Spirit of God that lives within us. We are seeking to align ourselves with the one who is the source of all being. In him we live, in him we move, in him we have our being. So this is a freeing way of living life. I don't have to have my neighbor like me. I get to love my neighbor. Do I want smiles and laughter and hugs on my street? Sure. I want peace. I want good things for my nation. I want good things for my state, for my region. But there will be times when we see that. We see the growth. We see the joy. We see a movement of the Spirit of God, and we see people flocking to Jesus. But there will be times when people's hearts see the message of God, and they're resistant. And they're not listening, and they're not going to understand where we're coming from, and we're not going to be understood. Or maybe we'll be approved for the wrong reasons, as Jesus is here. But our job remains the same. And if we are focused on Jesus, on being like him, and being a community that lives by the Spirit of God living within us, that is going to show. That is going to be demonstrated in our deeds. That's going to be seen in our area, and in God's good time, we will see the fruit of it. But we cannot be people that are seeking for the glory of the world around us. We need to be able to be satisfied, to be living in the joy of the Lord, even when the world is looking at us as dishonorable. So moving then into this region where he's already said, that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. So we came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. Now, the word used here, we're not quite, it doesn't tell us for sure if this is a Jew or Gentile, but chances are this is probably a Gentile working under Herod Antipas. But again, it's not all that specific. This is where he had made the water wine, and at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. I've shared this story before, but one of the worst dreams I've ever had that affected me physically the most was I had a dream that my son Abraham was on death's door, and they were getting ready to unplug the life support. And I woke up just absolutely weeping. And I just had that moment that experientially in my mind that was real. And it took me a while to come to the point to realize that it was okay. And I just cried and cried and cried when I realized that he's still here and everything's fine. This man is at a desperate point. Can't think of many things more desperate than knowing that your own child is getting ready to die. And he is coming to Jesus. And if we're going with the flannel graph version of Jesus, which we talked about that in Sunday school, I love flannel graphs. But depending on the flannel graph, sometimes stories were flattened. If we think of the happy Sunday school Jesus, you might expect his first words to be something of just immediate comfort. But let's look at this. So therefore, here's this man coming in his desperate need. So Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Ugh. Seems a bit harsh. Here's a man who has come to you with the impending death of his son, and he says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now this "you" is plural. So he's taking this moment when this man is in desperation, and Jesus, he's acting in love. He's acting with a good will towards this person. But he's behaving differently than is expected in this social situation. He's seeing him as part of a group, and he's saying, you humans, you people, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The scriptures, and I won't go there for time's sake this morning, but if you go to Romans 1, you can see Paul talking about there's enough evidence out there in the world as it is, apart from signs and wonders, to understand that there is a God, that we are responsible before him, and that we are not obeying even the bit of the law that we understand. There's enough information for us to see, to make this connection that we are created, there is a creator, we belong to him, and we have lifted up our fists against him. And Jesus, obviously Jesus does a lot of signs and wonders. God sends him to do so. It's a good thing that Jesus is doing this, but Jesus is taking a moment to remind him of, he's zooming out. We had that image on the cover slide of this sermon, of this sort of universe in a box sort of thing. He's asking this man to zoom out and saying, why does God have to show signs and wonders? Because we are so out of alignment in our fallen humanity with God that we are in rebellion against him. It takes these lightning rod moments to get our attention and say, no, God really is talking, and this is what God is really like. And Jesus himself becomes this sign about, if you want to know what God is like, well, he sacrifices himself for mankind out of love. Turns the hatred and evil of mankind into a tool to achieve his own victory over sin. This is what God is like. So he gives him this rebuke, in a sense. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The official said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. So he's still, please come. Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. So he doesn't give him the response to, he doesn't follow him, doesn't go to his house as he's expecting, probably has an expectation of what a healer would try to do to the son. He doesn't even go with him. He just says, go, your son will live. So there's been no sign. There's been nothing amazing that Jesus has done. Jesus just speaks it and says, go, your son will live. And this next sentence is interesting to me. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. What has Jesus just said? Y'all don't believe unless you get signs. But in the very rebuke, this man has turned around in the next moment and has believed without a sign. You see this? It's an interesting little twist. time travel movies are sort of interesting to me because you always get into, none of them ever work out perfectly, and everybody always picks out where it wouldn't have messed up and they prevented their own birth or this sort of thing. But one of the things that I think it's interesting to think about is ourselves as time travelers. We're all traveling into the future, and we have each moment as a chance to shape that future. And so Jesus, in saying, unless you, plural, see signs and wonders, you will not believe, he's rebuking this man and his setting in his heart. He has created the reality in this man's heart, this situation where the man actually does believe without seeing the sign or the wonder. So Jesus is using the very rebuke itself to bring out the opposite of the rebuke in this man's heart. So our second main point. Hard truths told in love can be deeply transformative. Don't ignore the Spirit's prompting for the sake of propriety. What Jesus does here is not what's expected. It's not what you do with a hurting person. But Jesus knows his heart. Jesus knows his story. And he gives him a truth, a deeper truth that he needs to know about his own life. Jesus is not only saving his son's life, he is saving this man's soul and the souls of his family through speaking truth to him at his point of desperation, of need. Jesus sees this opportunity and gives him this deep truth and indeed this deep rebuke. So both from the side of telling these truths and of receiving these truths, we need to understand that we need to hear hard things. Sometimes the most loving thing that someone can do for us is remind us of the things that we lack, of the things that we are doing wrong. Now, obviously, this needs to be done in wisdom. Obviously, you don't just come in guns blazing. Usually, these are exceptional circumstances. But we need to be the kind of people that aren't only giving positive affirmation of people, although we do this, but we need to be like Jesus and be reaching out in love, but then also honestly handling the truth in such a way that the negatives, where people are not measuring up, is important. The gospel message is there because we are sinners. People need to hear that. People need to understand when they are breaking God's law, and we as a church need to be the kind of people who are so close to each other and so unified around the goal of pursuing God, no matter whether we are being honored or dishonored by those around us. We need to be able to love so much that we're willing to take that step and do the socially awkward thing of saying, brother, this is a problem in your life. And obviously we're not Jesus, and so we need to be very humble in the way that we do this and circumspect and understanding our own failings. But we need to be aware of those situations when we need to step in, and also be aware that other people may need to step in that way in our own lives and give us these important truths. I talked a little bit about the cloud of being so many things in the brain, and each of us has our own list, father, husband, son, worker, pastor, all of these bits and parts of our lives can come in and crowd things out. And sometimes life can seem so hard, but you know what? Sometimes at these low points where we are so weighed down, sometimes it may feel like somebody has come and kicked us while we're down. But sometimes it's at these low points where we need to hear a transformative truth about ourselves, about something that we need to change. So, hard truths told in love can be deeply transformative. Don't ignore the Spirit's prompting for the sake of propriety. So, looking at his response then, Jesus, by giving him this warning, he has brought about this transformation in the man's heart. He does believe without the sign, at least believing enough to believe that Jesus is going to do what he has said. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So he believes, and then he gets the sign, and then that belief
grows. And this is what we are seeking to be. We love to see the miracles. We love to see the obvious hand of God in situations. But even when it feels empty and normal and it's hard to see what God is doing in our lives, we still have the scriptures. We still have his guidance for us. We still have a life to live and a job to do, even when it feels empty and hard. So sometimes we're going to get the sign, we're going to get the wonder, we're going to get to be built in our faith, but our faith must precede those signs and wonders. We need to be able to have that everyday faith that Jesus expects of us all. So going on to chapter 5. So there's our first man. He has received in his time of need this rebuke, but it has turned around in his heart to produce something beautiful, something good, and something that was beneficial to his whole household. But this second man is a different situation. I want you to think about the man who's being healed in this context. It's hard to there's debate about exactly how to think about this individual. Verse 1, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And I'm going to stop here. We're getting a little nerdy for a minute. If you're using the King James or a New King James, you would see another verse following this, or some phrases and then another verse following this. When I was a kid hearing this story, I heard it this way. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease he had. Now, so when I was a kid, when I heard this story in the flannel graph version, that sort of thing, you would see this miracle pool where people would be sitting around it, and first one in would, God was at work. The angel of the Lord was stirring up the waters. First one in would be healed. And I always wondered as a kid, I'm like, wouldn't you have heard a whole lot more about this? Like, this is pretty crazy. Like, that's who needs doctors anymore? Just get the line going at this pool to get in at the right time. Our oldest and best manuscripts do not have this section. It goes straight from 3. If you're reading the ESV, it goes straight from verse 3 to verse 5. It says, in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. And we'll see later that he does have some sort of expectation of the pool having a healing power on him, but the exact line of God himself is directly involved through an angel and causing instant healing to the first person to be in, this is not in the text. And so it's thought by a lot of scholars that this is something that somebody had written in as an explanatory note, most likely. And if you're dealing with ancient handwritten manuscripts and you write a marginal note, well, guess what? The person down the line who's copying after you may not understand that was your marginal note as far as what you thought was the explanation for how people thought about this pool. For them, they might be, oh, yeah, somebody left this out. And so they're going to put it into theirs, and eventually it enters into the manuscript tradition. So the United Bible Society's 5th Revised Edition, they have a way of grading textual variants and saying, we're pretty sure about this one, we're not sure about this one. The reading that the ESV here has of leaving it out, they gave it an A rating. Like they're really sure that this wasn't part of the original Gospel of John. So, again, I don't want to take a hard, this is exactly how it is. I want to leave the evidence for how it is. There is disagreement about this, but for me personally, I think it's more likely that this is not an actual supernatural thing that is going on. For one, again, if this is a magic pool with healing like that, I really think you would have seen more. And I really think, that for one, with people acting the way they are, it would have been monetized or organized in some official way. I mean, maybe you could imagine God keeping that from happening, but it's odd that this is not something that is more well known. So for me personally, I think it's more likely that this has a reputation for healing. And just as we have, I believe that the Lord can heal in miraculous ways today, and I believe that he does. But I also know that there are charlatans, and I also know that there are people who are easily deceived. I also know that confirmation bias is a thing. And so this may have been a place where enough people come out of the pool and end up getting better eventually that the reputation grows. But regardless, whether this is actually happening or not, I just want to get that out of the way. For the sake of the story, whether it really is happening or not is not where John is going in his emphasis in this passage. So with that out of the way, we'll go back to verse 3. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" That's an interesting thing to ask a sick person lying by a healing pool. Do you want to be healed? And some writers have looked at that and said that we should take that and say this might tell us a little bit about what kind of a mental setting this man had. He says, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. So this is amazing, If the at least the story of this pool is true in the minds of people, and he's been lying here hoping to take advantage of these healing waters, and he's been sick for 38 years and has never been able to be there, to be the one in time to get into the water. Some have asked, it's like, really? Does the guy really want to be healed if it's been 38 years and he's never managed to be the first in line? Surely you could convince somebody at some point in this time period. But again, the text doesn't exactly tell us what the man is thinking here. But he is in need. It's a chronic need, and it's something where he doesn't have the friends to help him. He's alone. In the midst of a crowd, he's alone. And as soon as he tells he tells Jesus his problem, Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And he does. It's just this instant. What this pool, what it was, the healing he was unable to get from the pool for all these years, for his access to this healing, Jesus just instantly makes right. So this is something amazing. This is someone with an established reputation for being this invalid. So this is not someone pretending to be sick and then, oh look, he's well. This is someone who is known to be this man with a long-term illness and in need, and Jesus instantly brings him to health. This should be amazing. This should grab our attention. If you have your eyes open to what God is doing in the world and you see this is hallelujah, praise God time. But we've learned to expect different from the crowds when Jesus does these things. The next sentence tells us what we should, gets us ready for what we should expect. Verse 9, and at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." Now, note this. Jesus could have just said, "Be healed." But he didn't. He said, "Take up your bed and walk." Jesus had purposely led this person into breaking the Jewish oral law. Not a law that God had laid down for them, but the tradition that they had established themselves. They like to pile on rule upon rule upon rule. We tend to obsess. We want people to be like us. We develop our own identities. And it's like God puts this rule here and says, this is what you should do and you should be. And then we all get clever ideas of how to make sure we get this done. And before we know it, we've built, well, if you want to do this, it helps to do this. If you want to do this, it helps to do this. It helps to do this. It helps to do this. Hey, look, this person's not doing this. I bet they don't care about this. And we create this whole other reality that God has not, that we create needs and burdens upon people that God has not placed upon them. We're making our large emphasis on minor things, on matters of opinion, rather than what God himself has said. But these Jewish authorities, these Jews looked at him, and what they see is not, wow, this man has been healed. It's, that dude's carrying stuff. We don't carry stuff on the Sabbath. This is where their priorities are. And if they didn't know the situation, he tells them, okay, it is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. But he answered them, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. So you could read this as positive, as him being like, hey, the guy healed me, and he told me to take up my bed. I'm going to take up my bed. But it's interesting, the phrasing here. He's twice making you understand. It's like, hey, this isn't on me. It's on the man who told me to do it. The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. They asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? So they hear the story of his healing, and it's not, oh, you were healed, tell me more. It's, well, who was this guy? This lawbreaker, this man who isn't one of us, has told you about this great thing. So this is where their emphasis is. It says, now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. He couldn't look out and see Jesus and point him out to them. Third main point for today is be on guard against human fences attempting to deny us access to God's good land. Some rules are made to be broken. Again, be on guard against human fences attempting to deny us access to God's good land. Some rules are made to be broken. I grew up in a very strict Christian environment, and as I think a lot of us have seen, we look back through church history, there's been a lot of times where people in the name of Christ have placed requirements upon people. This is how you live Christianly. And these items that are listed have nothing to do with what the scriptures talk about. They're all peripheral items. They're all ways of us saying, hey, our crew's got it right. You do these things and you're one of us. If you hear a story of a miracle happening or a revival happening, a lot of times Christians on social media will be like, praise the Lord, look at this amazing thing. But you'll also see the comments, well, aren't those people Pentecostals? I heard they're of the Church of the Nazarene. Or I hear they're Baptists. Are you sure this is a good thing? Or these are the Reformed. Those people are pretty nasty. It's like we look at people that we disagree with on peripheral things and we think, unless they are perfectly in line with us, because we know we've got it right, God's not going to use them. But if you look back through the whole stretch from Genesis to Revelation, God is always working with imperfect people. That also means he's working with imperfect denominations. I love my Baptist preacher, grandpa, who was a pastor of a Bible church, and I love and benefited from my Granny Judd, who's a Nazarene Sunday school teacher. We have disagreements. We have things where we see that the text aligns differently in our point of view. But if you live long enough, you find yourself sometimes moving to the other direction to find out, oh, I've been wrong on this. Well, what do we do then? We have to say, oh, well, God has not been working on me until this point because I was in the wrong here, so he must not have been, I must have had no ministry and it's all been in the flesh, and now that I've got it all right, God's using me. No, God's been making use of his people the whole time, and we will differ with each other, we will grow, we will discuss the scriptures and correct and be corrected. This is part of it. And if we have this kind of mentality, when we see God at work, when we see something amazing, we're going to say, wow, let my ears be perked up, let me listen, let me examine this. Now, sometimes we're going to find it's fake, we're going to find it's not beneficial, but other times we're going to be surprised, and we might find ourselves saying, wow, God loves those people too. God's using those people too. But because we build these human fences, we want to be the hero of the story. You've got to be like me, otherwise you're not on the side of the good. But the gospel says we're all sinners. The gospel says we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and it's Jesus who's the hero. It's Jesus who has made the peace. It's the Holy Spirit living within us that is producing the works that he has called us to do. So let us be people that look at these flimsy man-made rules, kick down those fences, and live in the good land that God has called us to live, that God has blessed us with. So, now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple. Now this is where I think you can go back and reinterpret some of this man's actions and get an understanding for where he is. You notice there was no faith response in this man so far. It's not like he believed and Jesus said, your faith has made you well, or anything like that. Jesus knows his story. The man tells him his problem, and Jesus instantly heals him. But the next thing the man does is point the finger and say, hey, it's not me, it's that guy. He told me to carry this mat. Verse 14, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Now, we know from the scriptures that just because someone is suffering physically doesn't mean that God is punishing them. But we do know that God does sometimes cause these things to happen. And so he's saying, listen, you're well. As of right now, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. And I think we can see why Jesus said this when we look at his response. Right after hearing this rebuke from the mouth of Jesus, he's been given this wonderful gift, this new beginning. And he could be worshiping at Jesus' feet. He could be listening to him. But Jesus finds him and says, stop sinning. Sin no more. And he warns him of the future that may happen to him. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. So this man receives healing from the Lord. He receives this great sign. Okay, contrast this with the first man. The first man doesn't receive the sign. He's just told it's going to be true. And he turns in faith. He believes, and he gets this sign performed for him, and his faith grows, and his family is brought into it. This man receives the sign, receives the rebuke, and he goes and tells on Jesus. Make sure the Jewish authorities know that's the guy you need to be mad at, not me. Go back to originally when Jesus says, do you want to be healed? That question seems to resonate a little differently. And again, I don't want to be dogmatic on this, but I really think this man was satisfied with the status quo. He's sitting there, he has his routine. And even when he is given this new lease on life, he's healed. He's able to walk away and carry his mat away. He's just looking to fit in, make things work out easy for him. Hey, don't get mad at me. Don't give me trouble, buddy. It's that guy over there. Good, the attention's off me. I can go live my regular life. So he can have a miracle worked in his life, and he's still just seeking to live the typical life to seek to please these Jews. He doesn't want to go through dishonor. He wants to be left alone. He wants to be okay with the powers that be. So he's willing to turn his back on his healer and make things hard for Jesus. So number 4, last point then is, do not abandon the glorious new future God offers for the sake of the familiar but destructive present. Do not abandon the glorious new future God offers for the sake of the familiar but destructive present. This man knew that he had broken the oral law. He's getting in trouble. This was a chance, and we'll see this later on in the gospel. He could have stood up and said, hey, God's done something here. Maybe you don't understand God. But no, he gives away he is warned by Jesus, but he goes right back into sin and just seeking to make peace with the powers that be. There's this new future that would have required sacrifice on his part, would have required him standing up and being something different. It's in a one sense, yes, he's freed from this hard situation, but it's a hardship now that he is facing to be facing dishonor for the cause of Christ. Christ has brought him forth into a deeper sacrifice, but a deeper, more satisfying reality. And he has said, I'll sacrifice the gold and take the plastic. I'm used to the plastic. I'm used to the cardboard. I'll just be where I am. I don't want what you have to give me. Give me the familiar. Let us be people that are not satisfied. I want us to be content with what we have. But spiritually, we are meant to be pressing forward. We are meant to be growing. We are meant to be becoming more and more like Christ. We're called into this life of human dishonor. We're called to be looked at in ways that are not fair because we're going out and doing the work of God in the world. Verse 17, Jesus answered them, or verse 16, and this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. So yes, God rested from his creative work, and he rests on the seventh day, but we all know that God is still at work in the world. And Jesus is like, you've transformed this all into something different. If they had known God and their hearts had been focused on the heart of God, rather than building their own little kingdoms, rather than making themselves the hero of the story, they would have recognized his work for what it is and would have bowed down in worship. But because they are focused upon themselves, they're focused upon human wisdom, they're focused on all that is going around them and all the things, all the pieces that they're trying to fit together to make their complicated life work, they're missing the main thing, which is being with God, living in his image, listening to him, and being transformed by the work of Jesus. So we'll go over these main points again and we'll close up. So further, seeing beyond with the eyes of faith. Number one, approval of the masses does not equal understanding. Our mission must be grounded more deeply in the very heart of God. Number two, hard truths told in love can be deeply transformative. Don't ignore the Spirit's prompting for the sake of propriety. Number three, be on guard against human fences attempting to deny us access to God's good land. Some rules are made to be broken. And lastly, do not abandon the glorious new future God offers for the sake of the familiar but destructive present. Let us pray. God our Father, we ask that you would give us hearts that are open to correction, that